Chapter 7. The savory odor of a stew pervaded the whole courtyard as Pons returned mechanically home. Mme. Cibot was dishing up Schmucke's dinner, which consisted of scraps of boiled beef from a little cook shop not above doing a little trade of this kind. These morsels were fricasseed in brown butter with thin slices of onion, until the meat and vegetables had absorbed the gravy, and this true porter's dish was browned to the right degree. With that fricassee, prepared with loving care for Cibot and Schmucke, and accompanied by a bottle of beer and a piece of cheese, the old German music master was quite content. Not King Solomon in all his glory, be sure, could dine better than Schmucke. A dish of boiled beef fricasseed with onions, scraps of sauté chicken, or beef and parsley, or venison, or fish served with a sauce of La Cibot's own invention, a sauce with which a mother might unsuspectingly eat her child, such was Schmucke's ordinary, varying with the quantity and quality of the remnants of food supplied by boulevard restaurants to the cook shop in the Rue Boucherat. Schmucke took everything that Gut Madame Zipod gave him, and was content, and so from day to day Gut Madame Zipod cut down the cost of his dinner until it could be served for 20 sous. "It won't be long afore I find out what is the matter with him, poor dear," said Mme. Cibot to her husband, "for here is Monsieur Schmucke's dinner all ready for him." As she spoke, she covered the deep earthenware dish with a plate, and, notwithstanding her age, she climbed the stair and reached the door before Schmucke opened it to Pons. "What is the matter mit you, mein good friend?" asked the German, scared by the expression of Pons's face. "I will tell you all about it, but I have come home to have dinner with you." "Tinner! Tinner!" cried Schmucke in ecstasy. "But it is impossible," the old German added, as he thought of his friend's gastronomical tastes, and at that very moment he caught sight of Mme. Cibot listening to the conversation, as she had a right to do as his lawful housewife. Struck with one of those happy inspirations which only enlighten a friend's heart, he marched up to the portress and drew her out to the stairhead. "Montame Zipod," he said, "der gut Pons is fond of gut things. Shust go round to der Quatre Pleurs and order a dainty little tinner, mit anchovies and macaroni. Ein tinner for le Gallus, in fact." "What is that?" inquired La Cibot. Returned Schmucke. "It is veal à la bourgeoise." Bourgeoise, he meant. "A nice fish, ein pottle of Porto, und nice things, der very best they have, like croquettes of rice and smoked bacon. Pay for it and say noddings. I will give you back the money tomorrow morning." Back went Schmucke, radiant and rubbing his hands, but his expression slowly changed to a look of bewildered astonishment as he heard Pons's story of the troubles that had but just now overwhelmed him in a moment. He tried to comfort Pons by giving him a sketch of the world from his own point of view. Paris, in his opinion, was a perpetual hurly-burly. The men and women in it were whirled away by a tempestuous waltz. It was no use expecting anything of the world which only looked at the outsides of things, und not at their interior. For the 100th time he related how that the only 3 pupils for whom he had really cared, for whom he was ready to die, the 3 who had been fond of him, and even allowed him a little pension of 900 francs, each contributing 300 to the amount, his favorite pupils had quite forgotten to come to see him, and so swift was the current of Parisian life which swept them away, that if he called at their houses, he had not succeeded in seeing them once in 3 years. It is a fact, however, that Schmucke had always thought fit to call on these great ladies at 10 o'clock in the morning. Still, his pension was paid quarterly through the medium of solicitors. "Und yet they are hearts of gold," he concluded. "They are my little Saint Cecilias, charming women, Montame de Borentoir, Montame de Fontenesse, and Montame de Lillet. If I see them at all, it is at the Champs-Élysées, and they do not see me. Yet they are ver fond of me, and I might go to dine mit them, and they would be ver pleased to see me, and I might go to their country houses. but I would much rather be mit mein friend Bons, because I can see him whenever I like, und every day." Pons took Schmucke's hand and grasped it between his own. All that was passing in his inmost soul was communicated in that tight pressure. And so for a while the friends sat like two lovers meeting at last after a long absence. "Tine here, every day," broke out Schmucke, inwardly blessing Madame de Marville for her hardness of heart. "Look here, we shall go prick-a-bracking togethers, und der Teufel shall never show his tail here." We shall go prick-a-bracking togethers. For the full comprehension of those truly heroic words, it must be confessed that Schmucke's ignorance of bric-a-brac was something of the densest. It required all the strength of his friendship to keep him from doing heedless damage in the sitting-room and study which did duty as a museum for Pons. Schmucke, wholly absorbed in music, a composer for love of his art, took about as much interest in his friend's little trifles as a fish might take in a flower show at the Luxembourg, supposing that it had received a ticket of admission. A certain awe which he certainly felt for the marvels was simply a reflection of the respect which Pons showed his treasures when he dusted them. To Pons's exclamations of admiration, he was wont to reply with a "Yes, it is ver pretty," as a mother answers baby gestures with meaningless baby talk. 7 times since the friends had lived together, Pons had exchanged a good clock for a better one, till at last he possessed a timepiece in Boule's first and best manner, for Boule had 2 manners, as Raphael had 3. In the first, he combined ebony and copper. In the second, contrary to his convictions, he sacrificed to tortoise-shell inlaid work. In spite of Pons's learned dissertations, Schmucke never could see the slightest difference between the magnificent clock in Boule's first manner and its 6 predecessors. But for Pons's sake, Schmucke was even more careful among the chimcracks than Pons himself. So it should not be surprising that Schmucke's sublime words comforted Pons in his despair, for "we shall go prick-a-bracking togethers" meant, being interpreted, "I will put money into bric-a-brac if you will only dine here." "Dinner is ready," Madame Cibot announced with astonishing self-possession. It is not difficult to imagine Pons's surprise when he saw and relished the dinner due to Schmucke's friendship. Sensations of this kind, that come so rarely in a lifetime, are never the outcome of the constant, close relationship by which friend daily says to friend, "You are a second self to me," for this too becomes a matter of use and wont. It is only by contact with the barbarism of the world without that the happiness of that intimate life is revealed to us as a sudden glad surprise. It is the outer world which renews the bond between friend and friend, lover and lover, all their lives long, wherever 2 great souls are knit together by friendship or by love. Pons brushed away 2 big tears. Schmucke himself wiped his eyes, and though nothing was said, the 2 were closer friends than before. Little friendly nods and glances exchanged across the table were like balm to Pons, soothing the pain caused by the sand dropped in his heart by the president's wife. As for Schmucke, he rubbed his hands till they were sore, for a new idea had occurred to him, one of those great discoveries which cause a German no surprise, unless they sprout up suddenly in a Teuton brain, frost-bound by the awe and reverence due to sovereign princes. "Mein gut Pons," began Schmucke, "I can guess what you mean. You would like us both to dine together here every day." "Gif only I was rich enough to live like this every day," began the good German in a melancholy voice. But here Madame Cibot appeared upon the scene. Pons had given her an order for the theatre from time to time, and stood, in consequence, almost as high in her esteem and affection as her boarder Schmucke. "Lord love you," said she, For 3 francs and wine extra, I can give you both such a dinner every day that you will be ready to lick the plates as clean as if they were washed." "It is a fact," Schmucke remarked, "that the dinners that Madame Zipod cooks for me are better as the messes they eat at the royal table." In his eagerness, Schmucke, usually so full of respect for the powers that be, so far forgot himself as to imitate the irreverent newspapers which scoffed at the fixed-price dinners of royalty. "Really," said Pons. "Very well, I will try tomorrow." And at that promise Schmucke sprang from one end of the table to the other, sweeping off tablecloth, bottles, and dishes as he went, and hugged Pons to his heart. So might gas rush to combine with gas. "What happiness!" cried he. Madame Cibot was quite touched. "Monsieur is going to dine here every day," she cried proudly. That excellent woman departed downstairs again, in ignorance of the event which had brought about this result, entered her room like Josepha in William Tell, set down the plates and dishes on the table with a bang, and called aloud to her husband, "Cibot, run to the Café Turc for 2 small cups of coffee, and tell the man at the stove that it is for me." Then she sat down and rested her hands on her massive knees, and gazed out of the window at the opposite wall. "I will go to-night and see what Ma'am Fontaine says," she thought. Madame Fontaine told fortunes on the cards for all the servants in the quarter of the Marais. "Since these 2 gentlemen came here, we have put 2,000 francs in the savings bank. 2,000 francs in 8 years! What luck! Would it be better to make no profit out of Monsieur Pons's dinner, and keep him here at home? Ma'am Fontaine's hen will tell me that." 3 years ago Madame Cibot had begun to cherish a hope that her name might be mentioned in her gentlemen's wills. She had redoubled her zeal since that covetous thought tardily sprouted up in the midst of that so honest moustache. Pons hitherto had dined abroad, eluding her desire to have both of her gentlemen entirely under her management. His troubadour collector's life had scared away certain vague ideas which hovered in La Cibot's brain. But now her shadowy projects assumed the formidable shape of a definite plan, dating from that memorable dinner. 15 minutes later she reappeared in the dining-room with 2 cups of excellent coffee, flanked by a couple of tiny glasses of Kirschwasser. "Long live Madame Zipod!" cried Schmucke. "She have guessed right." The diner out bemoaned himself a little, while Schmucke met his lamentations with coaxing fondness, like a home pigeon welcoming back a wandering bird. Then the pair set out for the theatre. Schmucke could not leave his friend in the condition to which he had been brought by the Camusots, mistresses and servants. He knew Pons so well, he feared lest some cruel, sad thought should seize on him at his conductor's desk, and undo all the good done by his welcome home to the nest. And Schmucke brought his friend back on his arm through the streets at midnight. A lover could not be more careful of his lady. He pointed out the edges of the curbstones, he was on the lookout whenever they stepped on or off the pavement, ready with a warning if there was a gutter to cross. Schmucke could have wished that the streets were paved with cotton down. He would have had a blue sky overhead, and Pons should hear the music which all the angels in heaven were making for him. He had won the lost province in his friend's heart. For nearly 3 months Pons and Schmucke dined together every day. Pons was obliged to retrench at once, for dinner at 45 francs a month and wine at 35 meant precisely 80 francs less to spend on bric-a-brac, and very soon, in spite of all that Schmucke could do, in spite of his little German jokes, Pons fell to regretting the delicate dishes, the liqueurs, the good coffee, the table talk, the insincere politeness, the guests and the gossip, and the houses where he used to dine. On the wrong side of 60, a man cannot break himself of a habit of 36 years' growth. Wine at 130 francs per hogshead is scarcely a generous liquid in a gourmet's glass. Every time that Pons raised it to his lips, he thought, with infinite regret, of the exquisite wines in his entertainers' cellars. In short, at the end of 3 months, the cruel pangs which had gone near to break Pons's sensitive heart had died away. He forgot everything but the charms of society, and languished for them like some elderly slave of a petticoat compelled to leave the mistress who too repeatedly deceives him. In vain he tried to hide his profound and consuming melancholy. It was too plain that he was suffering from one of the mysterious complaints which the mind brings upon the body. A single symptom will throw light upon this case of nostalgia, as it were, produced by breaking away from an old habit. In itself it is trifling, one of the myriad nothings which are as rings in a coat of chain mail enveloping the soul in a network of iron. One of the keenest pleasures of Pons's old life, one of the joys of the dinner-table parasite at all times, was the surprise, the thrill produced by the extra dainty dish added triumphantly to the bill of fare by the mistress of a bourgeois house to give a festal air to the dinner. Pons's stomach hankered after that gastronomical satisfaction. Mme. Cibot, in the pride of her heart, enumerated every dish beforehand. A salt and savour once periodically recurrent had vanished utterly from daily life. Dinner proceeded without le plat couvert, as our grandsires called it. This lay beyond the bounds of Schmucke's powers of comprehension. Pons had too much delicacy to grumble, but if the case of unappreciated genius is hard, it goes harder still with the stomach whose claims are ignored. Slighted affection, a subject of which too much has been made, is founded upon an illusory longing, for if the creature fails, love can turn to the Creator who has treasures to bestow. But the stomach, nothing can be compared to its sufferings, for, in the first place, one must live. Pons thought wistfully of certain creams, surely the poetry of cookery, of certain white sauces, masterpieces of the art, of truffled chickens, fit to melt your heart, and above these, and more than all these, of the famous Rhine carp, only known at Paris, served with what condiments! There were days when Pons, thinking upon Count Popinot's cook, would sigh aloud, "Ah, Sophie!" Any passer-by hearing the exclamation might have thought that the old man referred to a lost mistress, but his fancy dwelt upon something rarer, on a fat Rhine carp with a sauce, thin in the sauce-boat, creamy upon the palate, a sauce that deserved the Montillon prize. The conductor of the orchestra, living on memories of past dinners, grew visibly leaner. He was pining away, a victim to gastric nostalgia. By the beginning of the 4th month, towards the end of January 1845, Pons's condition attracted attention at the theatre. The flute, a young man named Wilhelm, like almost all Germans, and Schwab, to distinguish him from all other Wilhelms, if not from all other Schwabs, judged it expedient to open Schmucke's eyes to his friend's state of health. It was a first performance of a piece in which Schmucke's instruments were all required. "The old gentleman is failing," said the flute. "There is something wrong somewhere. His eyes are heavy, and he doesn't beat time as he used to do," added Wilhelm Schwab, indicating Pons as he gloomily took his place. "That is always the way if a man is 60 years old," answered Schmucke. The Highland widow, in the Chronicles of the Canongate, sent her son to his death to have him beside her for 24 hours, and Schmucke could have sacrificed Pons for the sake of seeing his face every day across the dinner-table. "Everybody in the theatre is anxious about him," continued the flute, "and as the première danseuse, Mademoiselle Brisetout, says, he makes hardly any noise now when he blows his nose." and indeed a peal like a blast of a horn used to resound through the old musician's bandana handkerchief whenever he raised it to that lengthy and cavernous feature. The president's wife had more frequently found fault with him on that score than on any other. "I would gif a good deal to amuse him," said Schmucke. "He gets so dull." "Monsieur Pons always seems so much above the like of us poor devils, that upon my word I didn't dare to ask him to my wedding," said Wilhelm Schwab. "I am going to be married." "How?" demanded Schmucke. "Oh, quite properly," returned Wilhelm Schwab, taking Schmucke's quaint inquiry for a jibe, of which that perfect Christian was quite incapable. "Come, gentlemen, take your places," called Pons, looking round at his little army as the stage manager's bell rang for the overture. The piece was a dramatized fairy tale, a pantomime called The Devil's Betrothed, which ran for 200 nights. In the interval after the first act, Wilhelm Schwab and Schmucke were left alone in the orchestra, with a house at a temperature of 32 degrees Réaumur. "Tell me your history," said Schmucke. "Look here, do you see that young man in the box yonder? Do you recognize him?" "Never a pit." "Ah, that is because he is wearing yellow gloves and shines with all the radiance of riches, but that is my friend Fritz Brunner, out of Frankfurt on the Main." "That used to come to see du play, and sit beside you in der orchestra?" "The same. You would not believe he could look so different, would you?" The hero of the promised story was a German of that particular type in which the sombre irony of Goethe's Mephistopheles is blended with a homely cheerfulness found in the romances of Auguste Lafontaine of pacific memory. But the predominating element in the compound of artlessness and guile, of shopkeeper's shrewdness and the studied carelessness of a member of the Jockey Club, was that form of disgust which set a pistol in the hands of a young Werther, bored to death less by Charlotte than by German princes. It was a thoroughly German face, full of cunning, full of simplicity, stupidity, and courage, the knowledge which brings weariness, the worldly wisdom which the veriest child's trick leaves at fault, the abuse of beer and tobacco, all these were there to be seen in it, and to heighten the contrast of opposed qualities, there was a wild, diabolical gleam in the fine blue eyes with the jaded expression. Dressed with all the elegance of a city man, Fritz Brunner sat in full view of the house, displaying a bald crown of the tint beloved by Titian, and a few stray fiery red hairs on either side of it, a remnant spared by debauchery and want, that the prodigal might have a right to spend money with the hairdresser when he should come into his fortune. A face, once fair and fresh as the traditional portrait of Jesus Christ, had grown harder since the advent of a red moustache. A tawny beard lent it an almost sinister look. The bright blue eyes had lost something of their clearness in the struggle with distress. The countless courses by which a man sells himself and his honor in Paris had left their traces upon his eyelids and carved lines about the eyes, into which a mother once looked with a mother's rapture to find a copy of her own fashioned by God's hand. This precocious philosopher, this wizened youth, was the work of a stepmother. Herewith begins the curious history of a prodigal son of Frankfurt on the Main, the most extraordinary and astounding portent ever beheld by that well-conducted, if central, city. End of chapter.